Now, let's just take a new perspective on fitness. Okay, let's have a new way to think about it. Here are some really good tips I'd like to give you. So tip number one, try to wear certain clothes or play certain songs that are going to make you feel energized during your workout. Tip number two, before you begin exercise, mentally go over what your goals are for the session. What movements are you doing? What order are you doing the movements? How long will you be resting? What's your rep range, etc. Take a moment, clearly visualize exactly how your time is going to be spent when exercising. Always try to attempt to reframe feelings of exertion or effort. Hello and welcome to Castle's Corner. I am Coach Castle, and today, instead of directly addressing the physical aspect of training, we're going to be addressing the mental aspect of training and how your mindset is actually holding you back. So let's go ahead and get into your expectations and self-limiting mindsets, how to overcome them, tools, techniques, what's really going on with your brain, mind, how it's connected to the body. As I always say, train the body, train the mind. So let's get into basically how your expectations affect your health and your performance, essentially leading to your self-limitations. So our expectations affect our life very much like our culture, our environment, and everything else that we interact with on a daily basis. They're constantly in the backs of our minds, and yet we're not really aware of their presence, and we really give them conscious thought, if you will. Now, for example, you might be under the assumption that your body is very resilient or tough, or that it is very prone to being sick and frail. You might think that you're lean and strong and sporty, athletic, or you might feel that you are fat, predisposed to gaining weight, and are naturally going to be heavy and obese. You might believe that there's stress in your life, which is harming your health. Or you might believe that a night's sleep will render you to be less productive, even grumpy, and, all those things the next day. Now, while these assumptions and expectations may appear to be inescapable and objectively true to you, these beliefs in themselves shape your reality and your health in very profound ways. Now, learning to control and reset your expectations can really revolutionize your life, health, happiness, productivity. Now, example, most of you have heard of the placebo effect. It's Latin for I shall please, and it's a well-known effect. Now, for those of you who are unaware, it is mostly known as doctors prescribing sugar pills, which can reduce various symptoms and accelerate recovery through the patient's mere expectation that they will heal the body. That's how it's tied in. It's the brain expecting. Now, amazingly, this does coincide with physiological changes to blood circulation, hormonal balance, and immunological response. However, a lesser-known belief, which can negatively impact your health, is known as the nocebo effect. Me and Jerry Brainham were just talking about this on the latest episode of Mythbusters. Most people are unaware that these two are different effects, the placebo and the nocebo. Now, of course, many people taking these placebo pills experience the benefits of the drug that they believe they're taking. Interestingly, up to 85% of them, they will also be reporting its side effects. Everything from nausea, headaches, fainting, drops in blood pressure, etc. You know the big list usually at the end of those commercials. Now, the more people are instructed about these side effects being a possible outcome from the placebo or even from a real treatment, the more likely they are to report them. Now, these are the lesser known nocebo effects, or it's Latin for I will harm. So the opposite of the placebo. And like the placebo effect, these symptoms, they're not imagined, but they're very real, they're very tangible, they're very measurable, with physiological changes to the body, including significant shifts in your hormones and your neurotransmitters. It is very astonishing as it seems that placebos work even when people are fully aware that they're receiving pills that don't have any active ingredients whatsoever. This is, of course, really important to understand because placebos are being prescribed much more often than you would think. Now, this is an example of how placebos work, even when people know they're nothing more than placebos. And one example would be in 2010, researchers recruited 80 people with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and split them into two different groups. One group was to receive absolutely no treatment, and the other group was to receive a regimen of placebo pills taken twice daily. Now, these, of course, were just prescribed as sugar pills. The word placebo was also printed right on the side of the bottle, really big letters, and even the team who was responsible for conducting the experiment was very explicit in their instructions detailing that there was absolutely no active ingredients in them. They were only placebos. Now, over the course of 3 weeks, these researchers monitored the two groups and reported the symptoms, and they found that 59% rather, of those who had received the placebo treatment reported relief from their symptoms, as compared with the group who had received no placebo pills. Now, pain, by the way, is one of the biggest symptoms of IBS. So just self-reporting these kinds of symptoms is pretty awesome. Now, placebos are really freaking powerful, as they've been shown in research trials to reduce anxiety, depression, pain, asthma, motor symptoms, relief of Parkinson's disease, recover from arthritis, improve fat loss, increase muscle gain, improve athletic performance of all kinds through a large variety of ways. And yeah, I'll be digging into the later ones later in this video, and then another video, by the way. Now, if you're still doubting the power of these placebos, please don't. Consider that in the pharmaceutical industry, the power of the placebo effect is so friggin' strong that new drugs are required to demonstrate that they have additional benefits above and beyond that of what the placebo is capable of before they can go to market. Furthermore, most drug and behavioral intervention trials fail this test, not because the drugs don't work, but because the placebo effect is still stronger than the actual medications that they're trying to put on the market, meaning that the fake drug is so effective, it is the standard all other medicines must pass first before they can even be considered for market. Now, obviously, it's not the sugar pill itself that leads to these changes in physiology and psychology, and of course, it's not some kind of a woo-woo, voodoo, magical bullshit either. There are several factors that come into play, although none of them are 100% confirmed as of now. Science is working on it. Now, one of the factors that can influence how effective the placebo will be is the person's expectations of its benefits. So just as a simple example, even in open label placebo studies, when people are explicitly told that the belief in the placebo is not necessary, they're just asked to keep an open mind about the results are still highly successful, even knowing it's a placebo. Now, of course, there's another possible mechanism in which the body learns to associate beneficial effects with some kind of an action or ritual. Many of us personally have had repeated experiences with taking ibuprofen, aspirin, NyQuil, Pepto-Bismol, all these things for whatever. And over time, your body will begin to associate taking a pill with symptom pain relief, meaning that the very act of taking the pill itself can cause the body to have the expectations that it needs to be healing that desired area. Now, interestingly, more than a century ago, the Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov found that he could train dogs to associate food with certain cues, such as a horn, a whistle, or even a flashing light. And yeah, we're not going to include this in Mythbusters, but it's a myth that he ever used a bell. He never used a bell. And evidently, of course, one of these various cues was enough to get them salivating for food without the food even being present in the room or even the aroma of the food in the room. Now, you'll experience this effect yourself regularly, by the way, in the same demonstrable way. Not calling you a dog, I'm just saying. When you are hungry, you salivate, and if you smell or see food that appeals to your senses, and that is the expectation effect in action. And then, of course, there is the mindset aspect, which must be considered and is often overlooked, such as that when a person begins taking a treatment, doesn't matter if it's a placebo or not, they will begin paying closer attention to their own bodies, minds, actions, how they behave, how they feel. Now, this can cause a chain reaction and cascade of effects, some positive, some negative, placebo, nocebo. Now, just as an example, when you're experiencing a headache, even if you don't take any medicine or any other action, the severity of your headache is going to decrease over time. And let's just say people who take open label placebo pills are going to get an improvement because the placebo pills are making them more in tune with the times as those symptoms subside. So normally they wouldn't really pay attention, but now they're paying attention and they're noticing it go away. Now, much like the research on placebos and nocebos, a whole new scientific understanding of exercise has come to light. So this is what I've been building to for a while. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff. And when I say a whole new scientific understanding of exercise has come into light, I'm not talking about biomechanics and I'm not talking about hypertrophy this time. I'm actually referring to our perception of the mind-body connection and the way that they interact with our fatigue. So just to keep this simple, the most common perception and prevailing theory is that our muscles tire when they run out of fuel. Fuel in this case being glucose, which is stored in the muscular tissues. And with the buildup of toxic byproducts such as lactic acid and such, it makes it harder for the muscle fibers to contract, thus slowing your movements until you exhaust the muscle completely, forcing you to stop. Now, that would be the issue with prolonged or intense exercise. Basically, your heart would struggle to pump the oxygen around your body fast enough to replenish the stores. And if your muscles were working hard this way, you wouldn't have enough time to convert the lactic acid back into glycogen through glucogenesis. Now, other factors, of course, were considered, such as stress, body temperature, dehydration, sleep impairment, hormonal imbalances, and injuries past and present, age, all of these things. They're all thought to be setting physical limits. And the mind, for whatever reason, outside of like martial arts, was considered to be much less important. Now, the common thought was, and mostly still is, that provided the athlete wants it enough, they will be able to go all the way till their physical limitations. The next step in science was basically the common approach was through carefully thought out and carefully applied tactical practice, essentially, any athlete would be able to pace themselves and avoid expending their energy too soon. Now, this is most commonly referred to as athletes and runners as hitting the wall. So basically, though their minds be willing, their bodies would quit. And basically, if one athlete is better than the other athlete, it is simply due to their good choice of parents, basically just meaning their genetics. Now, until very recently, this biochemical explanation of fatigue has been all that's been known. And you were probably taught it at some point in your education or by some gym bro. But unfortunately, research has never been able to confirm or find evidence that athletes are performing at their maximum capacity as is predicted by this theory. Rather than showing any form of plateau or decline at some point in the exercise, athletes' bodies always appear to be able to maintain their exercise and energy expenditure for a much longer period, and yet over and over again, athletes will hit the wall or fatigue to exhaustion and be forced to stop. Now, even when these athletes were self-reporting themselves to be performing all-out maximum efforts, researchers found that only 50 to 60% of the muscle fibers appear to have been operating during prolonged or even extremely intense exercise. And if this theory was correct, well, then you could then expect to see many more of the fibers to have been recruited to share in the burden before reaching exhaustion, and they were not. So, since this was not the case, the lack of the biochemical and the mechanical failure, as well as the copious amounts of evidence that, well, lactic acid does build up in the muscles during exercise, this has never in a single study or research or experiment ever been proven that it weakens and fatigues muscles in the way that had once been assumed. So, to get up to date with the current theory of how the mind affects the body, a couple more decades of progress, it seems that the brain uses its previous experience and memories, as well as physiological sensations, such as their body temperature, stress level, sense of mental strain, their current mood, and predictions of abilities, as well as how much of the remaining task is left to carefully complete. That's what the brain uses to judge how much force, effort, exertion, how much exercise you can perform, and for how long. Now, these factors will determine everything from how many muscle fibers are recruited to the intensity of the movements that the body is able to withstand. And at a certain point, the brain senses that you are overexerting yourselves. Then your mind will put the brakes on your movement, inhibiting those signals going into your muscles, basically making you feel like you're hitting the wall. It creates that powerful kind of overall sense of fatigue that makes it harder and harder to keep going. Now, although the feeling of exhaustion or fatigue is very uncomfortable in the short term, it does help to preserve energy and keep us from injuring ourselves. However, this is the issue. The brain's estimates are always very conservative about what you're actually able to achieve. And that, of course, makes evolutionary sense. Unless you're faced with a life or a death threat, it is much better to play it safe and avoid getting any harm done to your body or overstressing yourself. And of course, in many cases, you can train the body in such a way that the mind is trained with it. You can set your limits and overcome many of them unconsciously when dire needs arises. So just a simple example of this is you can think of the cliche but very real examples of family members rescuing each other with what's commonly known as ludicrous strength. Mothers lifting cars off their children, a teenage girl in Australia lifting a fire truck off her father, etc. You guys have all heard these things. I don't need to get into it. Or you can consciously remove them with practice, and this is what we're trying to do. And this is by taking advantage of the human body's massive adaptability to just about everything. And you can even basically remove your limits to the point of death. So this is actually the case, as an example, with freedivers. So one of the freediving is when you go underwater with no scuba gear, basically, just holding your breath. And one of their training practices involves basically increasing their CO2 retention ability. Basically something known as lung packing. So they just kind of take the deepest breath possible, inflating their lungs all the way, and then they use the epiglottis to hold their throat shut and take in a mouthful of air with fully puffed cheeks. Then by using the tongue as a shovel, they kind of attempt to pack in the air from the mouth and the lungs. And then once that mouthful is packed down, the diver repeats the process over and over again until their lungs are overpacked, basically. Now, under normal circumstances, the average lung capacity is 4 liters for females and 6 liters for males. But by using this technique, you can add an extra 3 liters of air, which is very impressive, actually. And then essentially, they just kind of hold their breath for as long as they possibly can. Now, lung packing and other breathing exercises they don't really stretch out your lungs permanently, but it's more like a rubber band that loses its elasticity. So it's easier to keep stretching it out. Now, they help loosen these muscles. They help increase your CO2 retention, but that's exactly the problem, actually. Now, most untrained people, for example, can hold their breath for like 30 seconds, 45 seconds before gasping for air. The CO2 reflex kicks in, they have to breathe. That threshold has nothing to do with oxygen, just to be clear. Your body has plenty of oxygen at that point. The problem is the buildup of CO2, which acidifies the blood and causes the urge for you to breathe. So, long story short, you don't breathe because you need oxygen. You actually breathe because you have too much carbon dioxide, which is kind of an overlooked element of training, is how important carbon dioxide is. But more on that another time. Now, with training, these freedivers can suppress this urge, and their blood acidifies more slowly than that of untrained people, basically. So, the peripheral blood vessels of experienced freedivers restrict quickly when they stop breathing, shunting blood away from the hands and the feet and protecting the brain, essentially. Now, these guys who are well practiced in breath holding can decrease their heart rate more quickly and dramatically in the absence of air, which of course allows them to go for longer. It reduces their need for oxygen and of course the buildup of CO2, plus they've already increased their CO2 retention, so it's a double whammy basically. So they're very good at holding their breath for a long time. Now all this sounds really great, pretty fun. You can hold your breath for a long time underwater. You can swim underwater for minutes at a time, just kind of holding your breath, no tank, no gear, etc. Even non-swimmers like to do this stuff. David Blaine, he held his breath for 17 minutes underwater. It was a stunt he did. Somebody else has done it for 26 minutes, I think. I can't remember who, though. But this is actually really dangerous. And the reason it's so dangerous, again, goes back to the CO2. You can experience something known as a free diving blackout or a breath hold blackout. Now, this happens while you're underwater, and the issue is there's no warning signs whatsoever. Now, this is due to the CO2 retention training that I keep talking about. Now, while they do have to perform this training to get better at their sport, it causes this effect. They have trained their body and their minds to become accustomed to acidic blood and therefore experience no discomfort and no warning signs before experiencing a blackout. And underwater, that's fatal. Freediving blackout or an apnea blackout, breath holding blackout, it's a class of hypoxic blackout or loss of consciousness caused by cerebral hypoxia towards the end of a breath hold dive. Now, this is when the swimmer does not necessarily experience an urgent need to breathe and has no obvious medical condition that might have caused it. They can even have hit the surface and taken a couple of gasps of air, and it will still occur and they still might drown. Now, it can be provoked by a lot of different things: hyperventilating just before a dive, the pressure reduction on the ascent, a combination of all three, but there's absolutely no warning signs to the diver whatsoever. And of course, what this means is you've literally become quite adept at mind over matter and accustomed your brain to the acidic blood, that you have removed all of your survival mechanisms in this case and pushed yourself to the limit point of quite literally death. Now, I don't want to scare anybody from freediving. This is just an example. And again, it's only if you're not careful. This is why freedivers always dive in pairs, to prevent any such tragedies. And even when this and many other safety precautions happen, there's still a large number of these deaths yearly due to these blackouts, which again have no warning, and people don't take that seriously. I'm going to say it again. They have no warning. And this is excessive due to the excessive CO2 retention training that they've done. And again, just their lowered response to the CO2 breathing reflex. They just don't notice. So they just kind of... Now, of course, the brain's predictions need to be flexible in order to adapt to rapidly changing environments and circumstances. Meaning that it's often possible to break your limits with some very small psychological nudges, like starting an exercise plan or starting a breath holding plan or practice, etc. And since the prediction machine, your brain, is constantly updating its calculations with the feedback it's receiving from your body, you can very easily boost your performance simply by changing your personal interpretation of these intrinsic signals which you're receiving, your sensory signals essentially. Athletes will typically find it harder to exercise the hotter they are, for example. Free divers, on the other hand, are unable to dive as deep when the water is really cold. Now, of course, again, this is due to the brain creating the sense of exhaustion or discomfort to avoid becoming hypothermic or prevent the body from overheating itself. However, as with the free diving example, this kind of training can be manipulated. If you have a long distance run coming up and it's in a hot place, I suggest you train wearing extra hoodies and you don't drink tons of water while you're running. It'll prepare you for the run. Same kind of thing free divers do. So of course you have a lot of tools at your disposal. Not all of them are rigorous physical practice, and a lot of them work great at overcoming our mental barriers. The one I'll be specifically kind of referencing here is visualization, as it's, again, misunderstood and overlooked. Now, visualization is pretty awesome, and many experiments have confirmed the amazing effects of visualization in athletes and casual exercisers alike. Although I gotta say, some of the most shocking effects I've seen have been found in people's musculature strength, their endurance, their fat loss, and really shockingly, even anti-aging. Now, a simple example illustrating some of these surprising benefits was that in one study, researchers split the participants into 3 different groups. Now, all of the groups had their objective measurements made, the strength, their physiology, all this stuff was covered. But specifically, they measured all of the participants' forearm strength before they conducted this bicep strength before they conducted this particular mental exercise experiment. Now, the task that the group was given was to, for 15 minutes, 5 days a week, imagine they were lifting a very heavy object, such as a table, using their forearms. So basically, a bicep curl, but with a table or something. Now, the first group was told to do this from an intrinsic perspective, basically visualizing or imagining that the movements they were making, as if they were doing it themselves, they were lifting the weight themselves, they just wouldn't actually do it themselves. The second group was asked to do this from a third-person perspective, as if they were viewing themselves from outside of their own body, performing this exercise. And the third group performed absolutely no practice, no visualization, no imagining, no exercise, nothing. Now, after 6 weeks, here's the results. The first group, the one I've been told to intrinsically visualize the lifting of the heavy object, a table or whatever, they had an increase of 11% in their overall musculature strength, specifically in their biceps. Now, this is despite not having actually physically lifted the weight. Now, the second group, the group which had used the third-person perspective, saw an improvement of 5%. And the control group actually seemed to be slightly weaker. It's actually not surprising with no exercise or even thinking about exercise. Now, much like the effects of the placebo, these findings are almost unexplainable if a person's strength was determined solely by their musculature mass. Of course, a little bit of neurological connection comes in. The actual mind-muscle connection, I'm sure, had a little bit to play with it. But other than that, with this new psychobiological view of exercise, it does make logical sense. And remembering that your performance relies on your brain's expectation of what the body can achieve or how difficult the exercise is perceived is going to be, then the brain uses its internal calculator and kind of plans how much force and exertion the muscles are going to be doing, as well as their limits or their safety feature before they start damaging themselves. Now, mental imaging, of course, will allow you to refine these predictions, increase your body's limits, and of course, its perceptions of its own abilities as well. So I like to use the ice bath as a pretty simple example. Again, most people, for whatever reason, they have a negative associations with ice baths and such. I grew up swimming in rivers in the middle of the wintertime. Ice bath has never worried me. But again, most people have this expectation that ice baths are this horrible, horrendous, torturous, terrible thing, and they'll never do it, and it's for elite professionals or whatever they think. I don't know what people think, but they won't do it. However, if you gradually start with a cold water bath, then 5 pounds of ice in the cold water bath, then 10 pounds, then 20 pounds, then 30 pounds. Each time you do an ice bath, you slowly are adding more ice. Eventually, you'll be able to do an 80, 100-pound ice bath, a proper ice bath, for a couple minutes, and you won't even notice because, again, just like with exercise, you have calloused your mind, and you've slowly acknowledged that your limits were bullshit, and you've slowly pushed your limits, expanding your comfort zone. So, of course, doing these kinds of visualizations or just physical pushing of your limits will be translating to an immediate boost of your mind-muscle connection, as well as improving movement coordination, discipline, mental willpower, all of these things. Now, the reasons for all of these upgraded expectations that will translate, by the way, again, into the very real performance boost, is that since internal imagery is more successful than extrinsic imagery, as it leads you to make a more detailed predictions of the way they're going to feel during the exercise. So like boxers, before they go into a boxing match, they should imagine how it's going to go, what they're going to do if he does this, what they're going to do if he does that, etc. And their body will actually be learning these movements before they even step into the ring. It's much better than if they were to be physically doing it, because the act of physically doing it, or even from a third-person point of view, imagining yourself doing it from this third-person point of view, it's not as good as actually putting yourself in your body in the movement. This is how you get those very detailed predictions and very rapid movement speed, body coordination, if you will. Basically, the body can execute the movements more efficiently with an improved neurological connection. Now, this is obviously not to imply that mental practice can replace physical practice. It cannot, and it should not replace physical practice, but you do have to have both. You don't have to have both, but it's good to have both. Again, talking efficiency here, guys. It's a great way to supplement your performance, to increase your conditioning, as well as to make the most of your rest days, as well as avoid a loss of strength after an injury. This kind of goes a little bit back to cross education. This is why it's good to do unilateral training instead of bilateral training. Now, for most people who are not like professional athletes who are extremely serious about taking their health to the next level, mental practice should be considered just another tool to maximize the benefits of your workout or to plan and structure your life in an efficient way. So, for example, if you find it difficult to go to the gym or tiresome to even think about performing another day of cardio, another 30 minutes on the Stairmaster, another 45 minutes on the treadmill, well, then you might want to change your mindset about how you feel about exercise and cardio. So regularly visualizing the benefits instead of the negative aspects will make the whole process much more appealing and enjoyable and increase your energy expenditure as well as the number of endorphins released during said activity. It's all beneficial. This is why people who are extroverted like to work out at gyms and in groups and stuff, because it gives them the fun aspect instead of, oh, I have to exercise, oh, I have to do cardio. So just be positive about it. And as you're visualizing, try to focus on all of the sensations you hope to feel before, during, and after exercise, positive ones. The feelings of being energized, confident, and in control, rather than the feelings of fatigue and exhaustion. You'll be reprogramming your mind and body connection to be allowing yourself to overcome the mental limits that have been hampering your performance thus far. This is going to make exercise not only feel considerably more enjoyable, but in essence, you'll actually be looking forward to it. It's also helpful, by the way, if you understand how to exercise. Biomechanics. I have 600 lectures on it. Food for thought. But also, and also try to consider it a highlight of your day, guys. As you know, the benefits it's going to bring to your overall health, mind, body, and mood. It's only good. Nobody ever had a workout and was like, oh, damn, I wish I didn't do that. So question your innate assumptions about your personal disposition towards athletic endeavors and exercise. Remember that your expectation and sense of your own limit can actually be much more important than any genetic factor. Now, let's just take a new perspective on fitness. Okay, let's have a new way to think about it. Here are some really good tips I'd like to give you. So tip number one, try to wear certain clothes or play certain songs that are going to make you feel energized during your workout. Tip number two, before you begin exercise, mentally go over what your goals are for the session. What movements are you doing? What order are you doing the movements? How long will you be resting? What's your rep range, etc. Take a moment, clearly visualize exactly how your time is going to be spent when exercising. Always try to attempt to reframe feelings of exertion or effort. Having these moderate aches and pains and senses of fatigue should all be worn as badges of honor, demonstrating that you are strengthening your body and your mind. And by the way, if you're more than a little sore, you're probably training wrong, or you're not sleeping correctly, or your nutrition is not on point, or your hormones are fucked up. So you really should check that out. Another really important thing, guys, just make sure you're not judging yourself against anyone else. Just judge yourself against you. You from yesterday, you from last week. Don't judge yourself against anyone else. Only you have had your background, your advantages, your experiences, your level of training, all your body, your everything. Only you have those things. So you are the only person that you can compare yourself to. If this was an experiment, you are the control group as well as the experimental group. You know what the control group has done and everything else. You're attempting to become better than that. So you're the experimental group. You are both the boss as well as the employee, guys. So, and one more final thing about your workouts. For God's sakes, please stop looking at your phones. Everyone is so distracted nowadays. Please don't be distracted. Stop looking at your phones. But anyways, that's all I got for this one. This is how basically expectations affect your physical limits in regards to exercise. I have another video coming next week. It's going to be how your expectations as well as the placebo effect affect your fat loss, as well as basically how rapidly it comes off, as well as how easy it is to maintain a lifestyle. So we'll be getting into that next week, but for now, this is it for this video. Just a reminder, guys, please, if you're able to, give it a thumbs up if you found this helpful. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment for the algorithm if you're able to. Just get this information out to more people. If you haven't seen it already, I have some really cool new stuff in my Etsy store. In case you haven't checked it out, please just do yourself a favor, go check it out. Everything there is for digital download. And of course, I have my brand new keychain gym. I just finished designing. If you haven't seen that already, make sure you go and you check it out. I got some fun podcasts coming up, and just make sure you tune into Sunday Live. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. Make sure you check me out there to get all your questions answered and anything else I can do for you guys. Everybody, have a great day.
If you know why you're doing something, that's all you need. I wake up ready for the day because I believe in everything that I'm doing, like it was meant to be. I get fixated and captivated on learning things. Don't hesitate to ask questions, the answer that I need. It's out there somewhere, I swear I can find the recipe. By testing, learning, and turning into a better me.
It lies deep way under the surface, and like a fire needs coal in the furnace. This is your goal that makes it all worth it. This is your why that gives you your purpose. It lies deep way under the surface, and like a